So another knot that can be quite useful in our top rope setup is our clove hitch. Now we do need to be careful with our hitches because they are knots that can slide. Now if you're tying straight to a fixed object, what you're doing is just passing around that object. I'm going to take my live end or my working end underneath my original line of rope, and then as I pass it to the back, I'm crossing over that original line to give me space and a loop to feed that working end back through. And as I pass that through, what we can see, I'm just tightening my knot up at the back here, and I'll show you that in a second. What we can see is that my two strands of rope effectively now look like they're coming out the center of a cross of rope. All I was doing at the back here is just ensuring that I have two straight strands. As I passed it through, they were crossed over, which gives it room to actually slip and move. Okay, so making sure with your clove hitch that everything's sitting flat, but like I said, all of our hitches are potentially sliding and moving knots. So if I reduce tension on one side, this knot can wiggle and begin to move and feed itself back through. So always with your clove hitches, any of your hitches, if you're not wanting them to slide or move, we'd be looking to back those up. So we could just run then back around with some half hitches. So I'm taking that working end and passing back through an open hole that I'm making once, twice, and preferably a third time to reduce any possible slippage there. Okay, if I just take that back to the beginning, have a look again, taking my working end of rope, might give myself a little bit more length this time to work with. I'm going to pass that under my original line and then back to the top, so that as I regather that working end, I'm passing back through that open hole that I've created. Okay, tensioning that off, got my two working ends coming through the center of effectively what looks like a cross. And backing that up with my 1, 2, and 3 half hitches, neatening it all off and tensioning so that then I can work with that line of rope. So there are lots of instances where if you're using a half hitch in a top rope setting, you may not have to tie directly off to that fixed object. Advantage of doing so is that I've got less equipment effectively in the system to fail, less checks to be made, but I'll often use a sling or a tape, and all I've done here is I've doubled that sling over, I've gone around my object, checked my tape knot, ensuring that that tape is safe and workable, and then I've just used a carabiner to clip those two ends together, ensuring that that's now fixed to my object that I'm tying off to. And in this setting, if I'm using a clove hitch, I don't need to tie around the carabiner because I'm able to actually just clip a knot to it. So another way that we can tie our clove hitch is I'm going to use, again, my working end of rope passed over my hand to the back. I'm going to reach between my arm and my longer line of rope. I'm going to grab that rope and twist my working end onto the inside. Okay, so let's have a little look at that again. Grabbing through my working end, picking it up and twisting that working end, and by that I mean that's my length of rope that comes out here, to the middle of that knot. Okay, I'm then going to work with this as the line of rope that has tension on it, because this is where my working end of rope was. I'm going to take those two loops that I've created and clip them to my carabiner, knowing that that tension line that I was talking about is closer to the spine of the carabiner than what the other loop that comes out as my working line, or what was my working line, actually was. Okay, and then making sure that that's tensioned. And as we discussed before, we would actually then need to tidy this up to ensure that we've got no slippage. Okay, so in the second version of that, I'm actually going to make sure I've got enough tail. So let's take that off and have another quick look. Taking that line of rope, pulling it through the center, twisting in, clipping to my carabiner. Okay. The beauty of using those clove hitches is that they can be adjusted really quickly. So if I need more tension on what is then running down to the cliff to ensure that I've got equalized strands, I can just take that tension away and feed that slack back through. So there's my clove hitch on my carabiner, and to back those up in these scenarios, because I don't have enough room and because I do have enough line to work with this really easily, I'm actually just going to tie a figure of 8, which is an end of line knot that won't slip, as opposed to that clove hitch that has the ability to slip. I'm then going to clip that also into my carabiner. So if somehow this decided that it did want to slip and take that tension from that line, the figure of 8 knot would then come into play and catch in behind that clove hitch. Okay, so there's your clove hitch clipped to a carabiner.